The following program is brought to you by the University of Alabama.
The past few years have seen the rise of the graphic novel, but Lila Quintero Weaver is a pioneer, one of the first to write and draw a graphic memoir. Darkroom tells the story of Weaver's childhood in Marion, Alabama, during the turbulent years of civil rights demonstrations and integration. I spoke with Lila Quintero Weaver in our studio in Reese Pfeiffer Hall on the campus of the University of Alabama. Lila, it's good to see you again.
Thank you. It's good to see you too.
I so much enjoyed our conversation a few weeks ago when you were on a book tour, and I thought we have to sit down and talk about that book. That's a very unusual and interesting book. You have written a graphic memoir, and to me that was news. I was only belatedly familiar with, the best of the graphic novels, but a graphic memoir is, how do you define the thing that you made?
Well, it relies heavily on visuals. I'm an artist primarily. In fact, I came to writing rather late in life. All my life I have been drawing, and it's really more my natural language. So when I discovered that there was such a thing as a graphic novel, and more specifically graphic memoir, there I could name numerous titles that I learned about, such as one by a woman named Marion who wrote a graphic memoir called Persepolis, and it's about her life in Iran under the oppressive government there and escaping to Europe and so on. So there is a significant precedent there in the field of graphic memoir.
Yeah, well, I'm such an old timer at this kind of thing that I used to think of these things as comic books, and they're only vaguely like comic books. They're really so much more complicated and so much more sophisticated. Did you read? You read a bunch. You read a bunch of graphic novels and a bunch of graphic memoirs to get ready, so to speak.
I did. I wouldn't go so far as to say a bunch, because there came a point where I didn't want to really be influenced that strongly by other works. I wanted to enter into sort of the visual aesthetic that I could produce based on my abilities and my sense of my story.
And your book has its roots, its origins here on campus. It was now I'm not dead sure about this, but it was a kind of new college project, research project, which fulfilled some requirements for you. Can you tell me, how did that happen? What made you go down this road?
Well, I enrolled in the external degree program, which has now changed its name to Life Track, and it's sort of a offshoot of New College, so it operates in a lot of ways like New College does. One of the requirements for graduation is a senior project. So when I learned about that in orientation, when I started in 2004, I immediately began to think about, so what could my senior project be? I'm kind of a planner, and I need a lot of time to distill an idea. So my thoughts began to turn toward immigration in a general sense, and then as I went along and narrowed my ideas and learned that there was such a thing as a graphic memoir, as I just alluded to, that I thought that suits me perfectly, because I have a story to tell and I have the visual tools to tell it with, along with some text.
How much of the book Darkroom was the project, the senior project? Because Darkroom has how many drawings would you think in the whole book?
It has over 500.
Whoa.
And so my senior project was only 40 pages long, and it was in literally in a photograph album with blank pages, and I used those little corner mounts that people use in photo albums to put my drawings in. So my drawings were meant to simulate photographs. So that's how I structured my senior project. And I did not use even any of those drawings in the book, in the final product.
Well, one of the things that I think is was a surprise to me about the graphic novel, graphic memoir, is that it seems to me in my uninformed state, well, this is just a quick way for somebody to get credit for reading a book. That is, in the case of, say, a high school kid. But I found that when I got going at your book and books like yours, it took forever. If you look at all the some pages have got 8 drawings on them.
Yes.
It takes forever. It's really much slower to get through it if you really do look at the drawings.
I think that's true, that if a drawing invites you in to observe more of the layers behind it, and I did spend a lot of time on certain drawings to try to create richness in the background and cultural elements.
Yeah, there's something to look at, and if you stop to look at it, you discover you spent several minutes on that page when, in fact, when you're reading, I spend 1 minute on a page.
Well, that's great to know, because it's a little bit akin to cooking a Thanksgiving dinner or something like that it might take you days even, or many hours, and then people eat it in 30 minutes and it's all done. Right. So it's nice to know that people linger over the images.
Yeah, well, they should. This is, as a memoir, it's a story of your life, and it's a story of a life, of a family which comes to the United States from elsewhere. Your family history is what? You came from where, and why did your father bring you all?
Yes. I immigrated with my family in 1961 from Argentina, but my parents had previously immigrated to the U.S. for a period of 7 years. They came in 1948. My father came initially on his own to enroll in New Orleans Theological Baptist Seminary. And then later, my mother and my oldest sister, who was a child, joined him. And then my second sister was born in Birmingham. So then the family went back. I was born, my brother was born, and then my father wanted to continue his education. He'd actually been an orphan and had never completed beyond the 3rd grade, and then he ends up going to seminary. There's a lot of story in between, as you can imagine, and then he wants to complete his 4-year degree, so he goes to Samford, which was at the time Howard College.
Right.
So that's how they ended up in Birmingham.
So your father is a Baptist Argentinian.
Yes.
Now, I don't pretend to be an expert on the culture of Argentina, but what's the percentage of, everybody's Roman Catholic, right? What's the percentage of Baptists, and how did he become one?
Very small percentage of Baptists. He became one because he was a street urchin, and the people that he found that reached out to him and helped him with his basic survivor needs were Baptist missionaries. And they happened to have Alabama connections, so that's how he went down that
And
road.
you came after, obviously, some time in Birmingham. The family decides, or it happens such that you live in Marion, Alabama.
Yes.
Maybe this is a good time just to, for a moment, the book is called Darkroom, and it is your father's darkroom. That is the darkroom in the book, right? He is a preacher sometimes, a teacher sometimes, and a photographer.
Yes, he's actually, his full-time work is teaching in the classroom. We went to Marion because of Judson College and Marion Military Institute.
He taught there?
Yes, he had jobs at both of those schools.
Teaching
Foreign languages primarily, also other things. So he did photography as on a semi-professional basis. So he had a home darkroom that was in an extra bathroom.
Right. So there's a what should we say, an artistic tradition in your family.
Absolutely.
You ever think about being a photographer?
No, because I'm not techie enough to do that. I feel comfortable with the tactile elements of drawing, pencil, and so forth.
Well, Marion is a small and as it turned out, a pretty turbulent place during the time that your family happened to like there and be there. Your father, it was the civil rights movement primarily, but there Before we get to that, maybe, early in your book, and some early chapters, you talk about not the civil rights marches and the violence, but simple adjustment. What are the adjustments? Food, dress, manners. What do you think of as the things that had to be mastered, the techniques that had to be learned to fit into a black belt Alabama small town?
Right. My parents, despite the fact that they had lived in the South before, found a lot of cultural difficulties and things like the food. I remember that something as ordinary to us now as parsley that we could not find in the grocery store, that was an exotic ingredient. So you can imagine my mother was an excellent cook, and she made all kinds of things. She made her own pasta because she couldn't find the kind of pasta that we had in Argentina. She made something that Argentine housewives can go to the grocery store to buy called dulce de leche. And Argentine housewives don't have to know how to make it because it's readily available. Well, my mother tried to figure it out on her own, and she did in fact master it. So those were kind of the food elements, but for me personally it was a lot about language acquisition and so forth.
Well, I remember your falsified breakfast. You have a page in there where what your teacher is interested in the children's nutrition, so you're to write down everything you eat for breakfast.
Yes.
And you lied.
I did.
Day after day. What was it you were supposed to eat? I presume it was toast and eggs.
Right. I think the idea of this breakfast contest was based on the 4 basic food groups, which is what we were laboring under in that era. And it was the hearty farmer's breakfast with eggs and bacon and all these breakfast meats and so forth. So my family did not eat that way at all. In Argentina, to this day, no one has things like ham and sausage and bacon at breakfast. Those are evening
They have coffee
elements.
and bread, some kind
That's
of
right.
bread.
That's right.
That's about it, right?
That is true.
That's true for most of the Western world, really. I think it's only really farmers who stoke it up because they're going to go out and work.
Exactly.
Not going to go to an office. How you fell into this historical moment. I think that's what makes your book, gives it a lot of its strength, is that by chance, good luck, bad luck, you happen to be in a place that is in turmoil. Your own place in this spectrum seemed to me was an issue in your book. You're not an African American, but you're not Tiffany Dawn Calhoun either. How did you fit? How did you find your situation in terms of black and white societies in and around Marion?
In today's world, if you fill out a form and that asks for race, then you have the option of Hispanic. You have a lot of other options. That option did not exist in the 1960s. So by default, we were white. Even though I didn't see myself as white, I define white as being Anglo, as the blue-eyed, pink-toned
the Bishop
person,
of Canterbury.
and we were exactly. So that wasn't an issue in an official sense. For example, we were never barred from, during the Jim Crow days, we were never barred from access to any public accommodations or anything like that, nor were my parents, except I think there's one story out there about a time when my father was refused service in a restaurant somewhere in Alabama during his original stay in the States. And that's, my father was more exotic looking. He had South American native lineage, and so he was more the exotic looking member of our family, and my mother was Spanish, French, immigrant, and so forth.
Well, it was amusing. There are parts in your book that are amusing because you're not a Barbie doll. You're not a blonde, blue-eyed Heather, and that was, if it wasn't the norm, it was the desired norm. Well, this whole American decade erupts all around you, and your father is busy filming it, documenting it, isn't he? He's out in the street.
Yes, he had a natural curiosity about a lot of things, and there were things going on in our hometown that at first seemed fairly benign. There were people out marching to protest
Right.
the fact that they were not being allowed to register to vote. And my father was very interested in this, and so he just took the home movie camera with no audio out there to the public square and films.
Right. Well, they got shown finally, did they? They got organized. People have seen these films of your dad's, right?
No.
Nobody?
No, not really.
Oh,
No.
well, there's a project for you down the road.
That's right.
It's to organize those. I think one of the strongest sections in your book is during the civil rights marches, and the reactions and responses to the marchers. You have a lot of faces, a lot of the faces of African Americans meeting and marching and talking, and faces of the crowd, the angry, the white citizens council types and Klan types, and those faces. Did you remember them? Are they created in your mind? Are they memories? Did you look at photographs? What? Because those faces, I think those portraits are some of the strongest pages in the book.
Thank you. I wasn't trying to recreate an actual person in any of those images.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to be more general than that, because for one thing, I was not present when those events
That's
occurred.
part of the
I was
question,
home in
really.
bed. It
Yeah.
was 9 o'clock at night, and
Right.
I was 10 years old.
Right.
So my father was there, and he witnessed a lot of what occurred.
Right.
So the faces that you refer to, I constructed simply from my imagination and my sense of.
Well, the black faces have a wonderful calm. I thought some of them were almost beatific, and then some of those young white men are just vile. I mean, they're past angry. They're all the way to evil.
And I
Did
did not
did
want
you
to
mean that to be
caricature.
as strong as that, or is that just my response?
No, I did. I did, because part of my challenge was to try to depict how strong the hatred was,
Yeah.
how strong the pervasive sense of darkness was, that I wanted the visual to carry as much of that as possible. It's
Right.
one thing to say
Right.
people were extremely racist at that time. Here I have this tool of the visual. I want to use it to the full extent possible.
Yeah, and it's powerful stuff, and it does work. You got involved in after school integration was achieved, you went to an integrated school. And I thought that, too, was an interesting section. Wasn't that easy, was it?
No.
I mean, for you, there you were, a person of goodwill, thinking, oh, this will be just fine. I'll fit in, and everybody will like me, and it will be smooth. But it wasn't.
It wasn't. And this is, I would say, a particular era, those years, that I don't think are covered that well in the literature. Because after the initial goals have been achieved of the voting rights and so forth, then after that, a lot of things continue to happen. They didn't have that dramatic impetus, but for me it was dramatic because for the first time I'm thrown into a situation where the school is 50-50, black and white.
Right.
And tension that maybe was remote to me at the time is right there in my immediate surroundings suddenly. So.
Well, what I liked was, I don't know if this is exactly the right word, but you had the girl, you as the girl in the book, have a kind of innocence that, because you know you're pure at heart, people should understand this, and everything should go along pretty smoothly. And you had all sorts of conflicts with girls your own age at school, and they're in the book.
That was the atmosphere at the time.
Yeah.
That the kids at school, there were white kids who were welcoming of African American students, and there were a few teachers who also were.
Right.
But old habits die hard, and the resentment, the sense of almost, I would say, disgust on the part of a lot of white students was palpable. It was an everyday thing.
And even though the school was integrated and presumably the town, that we had crossed a threshold into a better day, you and your brother both got into some difficulties for being too friendly with black friends, with black students.
Sure, yes.
At one point he's defending your honor, is he, and about to get beaten up by
Right.
a whole gang of boys.
That's right. There was blowback from certain segments of the white community.
In Brazil and in Argentina, what little I understand about it, there's a kind of a spectrum of color where, you know, it's everybody's somewhere on the spectrum, but it isn't polarized the way our racial situation mostly is. And I wonder if that had some effect, if your sense, even though you were just a little girl, I wonder if you weren't thinking in the way that a South American, a Brazilian or an Argentinian would be thinking, that we're all on this spectrum somewhere.
Well, the spectrum in Argentina is quite narrow because there are very, very few people of African origin, even to this day. When I go back to visit, I can walk down a city street in Buenos Aires that looks much like New York on a busy day with thousands of people on the sidewalks. I don't see a black face anywhere.
Is that right?
Yes, that's still true.
And what about indigenous peoples?
Well, the indigenous people were driven out and slaughtered, just like they were in many other places, by the conquistadores and by the settlers of Argentina. So there's a lot of shame there about the way that things happen in the early history.
History. I'm so glad you said that. That triggered something I've been meaning to ask all along. You have a wonderful little piece about Alabama history books.
Yes.
And their depiction of the Alabama past. What made you decide to put that in? It's sort of a book about a book, you know, when you get to that. But you did it anyway.
And there are a few other places where it's a book about a book, or because, for example, Black Like Me is a book that my sister had on her bookshelf, and that was influential to me as a child. But I happened to be in the public library here in Tuscaloosa with my children one day, and while my child is roaming around looking at books, I'm in the reference section, and I happened to see a copy of that textbook, No Alabama, and I recognize it. That's my textbook I had in the 4th grade, and this was many years before I even contemplated writing this book.
Right.
So I opened it up, and it was deja vu to look at those pages and to realize I had this textbook when I was in the 4th grade. You talk about revisionist history. It's shocking.
The parts that you quote are plantation life as Garden of Eden. Everybody is just so happy and all just getting along, just great, having a wonderful time, singing and dancing and eating pet picnics and barbecues.
Yes, and the slaves are so happy to be working, picking cotton for these masters.
Where your book, Darkroom, takes you up to what age about?
About 15 or 16. So it covers about a 10-year period. I was 5 when my family immigrated from Argentina. That was in 1961, so to around 1970.
When you were making the book, going along, there must have been how do you know when to stop? You could have stopped, and now I've graduated from high school and I'm leaving town, or now I fell in love for the first time, or whatever. But how did you know when to quit?
Well,
what seemed right to you?
I guess I wanted to quit with a scene that communicated to the reader,
Right.
Here's the complexity of this racial picture in 1970, that when a white person, if that's what I'm to be taken for, has sympathetic feelings toward the African American community, here's where it lands me.
Right.
So that's my...
Well, you do leave, I mean, at the end of your memoir, not all questions have been answered.
Right.
Not all issues have been resolved.
Exactly. Nor have they to this day,
No,
right?
I guess not. What will you do next? I'm very much in the habit of, usually when I'm talking to a novelist, say, who's just written his or her fourth novel, I'm inclined to ask, and what will your fifth novel be about? But this was a kind of adventure for you. Will you write more? If so, what kind of thing will you write?
Well, part of the adventure that I had with writing Darkroom was learning a lot about using computer programs for page layouts and so forth. That was quite a steep learning curve for me because I'm not inclined that way. So now, what I'm faced with now is the possibility of writing fiction, highly illustrated fiction, and either in graphic novel or just simply say YA novels that have a lot of illustration to them. There's a market for that.
And are you thinking, in a sense, adult literary fiction, graphic fiction, or are you thinking young adult?
Both.
'Cause they're both.
Possibly. And so part of my new challenge then is to teach myself really how to write that way, because I don't have an MFA, I don't have a long experience in creative writing, so I'm up for the challenge.
The number
Old
of
dog
people,
can learn new tricks.
the number of people from Milton to Hemingway who do not have MFAs is very long. You will do just fine.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lila. This has been a pleasure. I wish you the best with your book.
Thank
I
you.
hope it's selling briskly.
Thank you so much.
We'll be looking for the next one.
I appreciate it.
To order this season of Bookmark on DVD, call 1-800-463-8825. Additional information can be found on our website at www.alabamatv.org.